Another day, another spark, lighting up the screen in the dark. Real talk, hoping something new. Pull up a chair, this one's for you. Life gets loud, but we don't fade. Every dream is being made. We're brightly minded, hearts wide open, speaking truth. Words unbroken with Mindy leading, light in mind, faith and fire intertwined. We're brightly minded, shining through. If you're growing, dreaming, this is you. Learning as we go each day, finding purpose on the way. Laughing loud, standing tall. You're not alone, you're not small. No perfection, just real here. Every step forward, year by year. We're brightly minded, hearts wide open, speaking truth. Words unbroken, Mindy's here, so come on in. Let the journey now begin. We're brightly minded, shining through. If you're growing, dreaming, this is you. This is you. This is you. Yeah. Every voice matters. Every story counts. We rise together, no doubt. We're brightly minded, hearts wide open, living free. Hope outspoken with Mindy leading, shine your light. Welcome to the brighter side. Yeah, welcome to Brightly Minded.
Helps if I add myself to the stage, doesn't it? Hello, friends. How are you? Happy Friday. Oh my goodness. This is going to be a short stream tonight because I am tired. It has been an extremely long week. We are one man down on our HR team at work, and it just means that there's a lot more to do and a lot less time to do it in. And it's worn me out. And we'll probably have to do it again next week too. So I'm not looking forward to that. But I am tired. And on top of that, we have a busy weekend because my husband is having his D&D buddies over tomorrow for D&D day. I have housework that I got to catch up on because I haven't had time all week to do it. And then I have a full day of church on Sunday because the course that I was going to take that I thought was last weekend is actually this weekend. So life is just nonstop. It sometimes feels like there's not enough hours in the day to get things done. But anyway, here we are. I just have to quickly say that it is hilarious when MAGAs get so obsessed with everything that you post and just get their panties all tied up and they focus on you. And it's just like, just keep on living your life and doing your thing and let them obsess. It's got nothing to do with you. It's totally them problems. So it is what it is. But what we're going to talk about tonight is actually this whole Greenland situation, because good Lord, like when he first talked about taking Greenland, I thought it's one thing that if he wants it and thinks that the US should have it, but it's a completely other thing about being serious about it and talking about taking it by force. So I don't understand the logic in a semi-autonomous country, territory, feeling like because we're the US, because we're the strongest military power in the world, that just means that you can bully other countries into taking what you want. That's not how it works. Like, to me, what it boils down to is if you're worried about the security of Greenland, okay, then why not sit down and have talks about with Denmark and Greenland and discuss a plan, an action plan of what you can do. Like if the US is so worried about security in the Arctic, then why aren't you working with Denmark to how you can beef that up to protect the territory if that's what it's really about? You know, you work with that allied country. You don't just take it over because you feel like you need it. It's for our national security. That land doesn't belong to you. You don't just get to walk in and say, I'm taking this over. It's ours now. Because how would you feel if another country just decided that Donald Trump is an asshole? He's destroying the US. Let's go ahead and go in and what if Denmark said, okay, we offered to buy the US, you turned us down. Okay, cool. Now we're going to use military force to go in and take it over. That wouldn't be acceptable. Most Americans would reject that. So why is that logic not applied the other way around? Why would Greenland want the US to come in and take over? Most Greenlanders have said they don't want it. Like, I think it was like something like 85% said no. The prime minister said no. Denmark says no. NATO has very clearly said no. But Donald Trump doesn't want to drop this issue. And it's like, I don't understand why you think in this day and age you can just walk into a sovereign country and be like, okay, this is mine now. That's just not how it works, right? Especially an allied country. Like, you may not agree with NATO. Okay, cool. You don't agree with NATO. But the US is one of the founding nations that established NATO in 1949. We were one of the foundational members. So why would you want to violate that and go against all of those allies and just invade another country? That's going to piss off a lot of other countries. That's not okay. Oh my goodness. Okay. So I saw this post and it gave some interesting things to think about. Where did it go? Because I just looked at it. Okay. So I'm going to read this. I'm not saying that this is exactly what's going to happen because really none of us know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know how this is going to play out. It's scary to think about how far it could go with troops and forces being deployed to Greenland from other NATO countries. I'm not MAGA. I've been very outspoken about Trump on my channel. I have a few lives you can check out about Trump. Maybe ask me instead of assuming. I will non-denom when my original comment at the beginning of the video was not a reference to you. I was not you were not the MAGA that I was talking about. So I apologize if it came off that way, but I was not referencing you in particular. Where was I going to do? Screen share here. And my post. There we go. All right. So again, I'm not saying that these consequences are 100% going to happen. Because again, nobody can tell the future. We don't know. We can't tell. But nobody can tell the future, basically. So these are just things to think about because these could very well be the possible consequences to Trump invading a foreign country. Even though it's a territory, it's owned by Denmark, and Greenland, if they want independence, then they should absolutely have that if that's a possibility. I know that they're a very small territory. They don't have a huge population. Whether or not they have the ability to be independent, like economically, considering all of those things, then they should be if that's what their people want. If they're happy with the way that things are now, then it should stay. But the US doesn't have the right to come in and tell them, hey, we're going to take you over because we feel like Denmark's not doing enough to protect this territory. That's I mean, the US can definitely voice its opinion, but that doesn't mean that you get to enforce your will upon other people. And that seems to be a really big issue with MAGA, where they think that they have the right to enforce their beliefs and their values and everything on other people, regardless of whether they want it or not. They preach freedom, but then they don't actually practice it because they continually want to force other people to do things their way. And me personally, I think that people should have the freedom to do what they want. As long as you're not harming anybody, you're not harming yourself, and you're not causing harm in general to like your community or the environment, then you should do what you want. Why do people need to come in and tell you what you can and can't do, right? But just don't harm other people. That just feels like it's common sense to me. Anyway, I got off topic there. Anyway, so these are the possible consequences that could be something that happens to the US if they decide to take Greenland by force. Um, so if we invade Greenland, we go to war with 31 nations. Now, I was doing some research, and troops going to Greenland and a US invasion doesn't automatically need war. One of the foundational principles of NATO was to de escalate situations like this, and to try and avoid war. Um, Let me see. I was just reading it. Where did it go? Okay. So NATO was created to prevent another world war, defend democratic nations collectively, deter aggression through unity, and keep Europe stable with US involvement. So their ultimate goal is to avoid war and avoid conflict. And they're going to try and do that diplomatically. So the reason why troops and forces are being deployed to Greenland is more so as a look, we're here, we're ready to defend this territory. If you decide to come in here, we are a collective group. We're going to stand together and be unified in protecting this territory. So it's almost like a defense display, I guess, is the best way that I could put it. As they're just showing that they're going to do what they can to protect that territory from the US because they're taking the US threats seriously, as they should. But that's one thing I forgot to ask is how many nations are in NATO? 32 countries. Okay. All right. So the post is correct. I just wanted to fact check it there myself. But there's 32 nations in total. So that would mean that we would be in conflict with 31 other nations, the US being the 32nd. NATO would stay together. It doesn't have a specific clause saying that if the US invaded Greenland, that they would be automatically kicked out. They're actually, from what I'm seeing, is there isn't actually any type of clause in there about what would happen if a NATO ally attacked another NATO ally. But they could definitely suspend the US while they decide what actions they're going to take in response to a US invasion. So it still ultimately wouldn't turn out well for the US, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would automatically get kicked out of NATO. The headquarters is in Brussels, yes. Our global reach across the Atlantic would end with our closest refueling base in Israel or Egypt. So basically, it would cut off the US from trade, from travel, all that type of thing. The US would not be welcome in Europe, essentially. And they would cut as many ties as they possibly could. And that would mean that US bases and US troops would automatically be kicked out of the country and shipped off home, because they would no longer be welcome. It would mean that bases in other countries could be compromised because the US is no longer going to have control of them, right? And that to me seems like a huge security risk, right? Because I'm not sure if that would include embassies or not. But think of the intelligence that could be compromised if those bases are taken over, and the US is ultimately kicked out. I'm not on the left either. I'm not for any party. I don't believe in the two-party system. They're all buddies behind the scenes. I agree with you, honestly, 100%. I don't think the two-party system is working, right? I can't stand Republicans. I don't agree with Republicans really in any way. But I'm also really, really disappointed in Democrats, um, because they're just sitting back on their hands doing nothing, and it feels like they're doing nothing. They're just letting this happen. There's a few outspoken Democrats, but unfortunately, there's not enough of the party that have enough power or are willing or care enough to stand up and do something to stop what's happening. So ultimately, the Republicans and Democrats are just, both of them are useless. Useless. I would love to see another system put in place. I don't know what that would be or what that would look like, because I'm not a politician. I'm not as educated in that area as I would like to be. But I would like to see something different, something that actually works for the people, cares about the population instead of greed and money and power. But I mean, that would be in a perfect world. Unfortunately, that's not what we live in. So ultimately, I guess we just kind of have to, as regular citizens, all we can do is sit back and just watch what happens and hope for the best, really. But I mean, we as the little guys don't really have enough power to stand up and do something. Collectively, if we all got together, on both sides of the fence and tried to fight back and really push for what we want as a community and as, citizens of this country, we might. But I feel like there's just so much divide amongst even just the people here that I don't think that would be successful, because I don't think enough people are unified in what we want. So it wouldn't really go anywhere. Um, all right, here we go. 100,000 American soldiers would be forced to board civilian airliner or civil airliners and sent home or be taken as POWs or detainees. I don't see NATO going to that extreme by taking American soldiers as POWs. It seems more likely, trying to keep everything as civil as possible, that they would just ship them home. But I mean, this is a possibility, right? This could be a consequence. We don't know for sure. Without weapons or equipment. Yeah, so that would all be confiscated, right? So who knows what other types of intelligence or weaponry or schematics or any of that stuff could be compromised when it's taken over by other countries. That would be a huge, huge security breach for the US. And I'm don't know about you, but I wouldn't be comfortable with that. Canada will close its airspace and sea space. So I'm Canadian. I'm from Canada. I spent, 42 years of my life living in Canada. And I can tell you that Canada's response to that would be really extreme based on the overall feeling of how Canadians, look at the US right now. They're very angry. There's a lot of boycotting. A lot of people hate Trump. Like, I grew up in a border city, so there was a lot of back and forth with, Americans coming over to Canada, Canada going over to the US, because we were allies, we were friends, we were, family almost, and there was a lot of exchange back and forth, and that divide has gone to as so far as dividing the US and Canada, right? And that's all Trump. That's all Trump. So, I mean, I expect Canada's response to be extreme if this happens, but I can't say for sure what that would be. I mean, it's very plausible that it would close its airspace and sea space, which would make it difficult for the US to monitor the Arctic like they are so saying they want to do. That would be basically be working against them, because not only would they not be able to get Greenland, but then they wouldn't have access to the Arctic through Canadian waters either. I don't know whether or not that would extend to Russia, whether Russia would react. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But it would be very limiting for the US. And I know that that's definitely not something that you want, especially in the type of environment and the global kind of community that we have now. Um, all right. US ballistic missile defense at Petfic and Fingandale's ends, which means we see nothing except what space sensors can see. So again, more limitations on the US and what its the capabilities would be for defense, which would be very, very scary because who knows what countries would take advantage of that if the US suddenly has blinders put on them because of their actions. That's consequences. US intelligence is reduced to Fort Meade, Fort Gordon, and Colorado Springs in Hawaii. So, right now with NATO, we share intelligence amongst the allies. We would be cut off. So, if there was something brewing in another country that put the US at risk, how are we going to know that if we're not sharing intelligence with our allies because we don't have any allies left? Right? That makes the US very vulnerable. Yes, we still have a very strong military, the strongest in the world, but being isolationist puts us in a really, really bad spot because one of the reasons why the US is so strong is because of its allies, because everybody's working together. And yeah, Europe is going to be weaker if the US leaves NATO. But ultimately, I think the US loses out the most because it becomes then the most vulnerable. No one will share anything with us. All global shipping will be closed to us. That, again, a possibility. Can't say for sure that that's what would happen, but I'd imagine that sanctions would be put on the US, much like Russia is. A lot of trade would be stopped or slowed down. That would include shipping. So that's really going to affect things that the US can't manufacture or bring into the country, right? So things like, and one of these stuck out to me is like medications. We don't make insulin in the US. Denmark does. The weight loss drugs like Ozempic, that's made in Denmark. So, I mean, things that we can't manufacture here in the US may suddenly be cut off to us. And important things like insulin and and other medications could be very detrimental to the US population. Like, sure, eventually we could start manufacturing that on our own. But insulin, for example, is a drug that people need to survive. People like my father, who uses insulin several times a day, could get very ill and die if he went even just a couple of days without his insulin, right? And if you're going to need to frantically set up a way to manufacture insulin to get it out to the American people, that's not something that happens overnight. So you have that gap in your ability to provide that medication to your population where a lot of people are going to get sick and possibly die because they no longer have access to it. You know, CIA spies will be rolled up by their former friends and ours. Again, that's not something I really know a whole lot about, so I can't speak to that. No one will share anything with us. All global shipping will be closed. Denmark operates the largest shipping company in the world. 6 out of 10 global shipping companies are in Europe. The world's biggest container ships come from Denmark. Australia, New Zealand, Canada are Commonwealth. So they will all cut ties with us or be neutral as well. So again, that would be setting the US up to be very, very isolationist, which is not going to benefit anyone, honestly. Denmark and locals ton? Oh, I think that was just a typo. Turn all life support and generators at Pitfunk in Canada resupplies it. All 150 US Space Force personnel would become POWs to guys on sleds. I like how they're referring to Canada as guys on sleds. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that Canada would take all Americans that are in the territory. as POWs. I think it would be more likely that they would just get deported out of the country. That seems more likely to me. But again, these are just all hypotheticals, and it's possible that it could happen. They have troops there now and 35,000 caribou hunting rifles. Listen, Canada fights dirty. And it was actually my husband that educated me a lot on this, is that there's a lot of things that are war crimes now that were determined to be war crimes because Canada was kind of bad and did some terrible things, and laws had to be put in place. International laws had to be put in place because Canada was, you know, not doing such good things. So, I mean, we have this general reputation for being very nice and being very kind and being very friendly. Um, but it turns out that when you piss us off, we're not the nicest people. There's a reason why it's called a Canada goose, and people nickname it the Cobra chicken. I'm not trying to endorse some of the really terrible things Canada has done, but it doesn't always turn out the best. And the last time the US and Canada tried to beef with each other, we invaded and burned down the White House. So, it's really not a good idea to mess with Canada because they will tend to not be very nice with you. And, we kind of hold grudges. France and the UK have nukes, hundreds of them, so you cannot intimidate them with that. That's always been my biggest fear when it comes to war, especially in this day and age, is who has nukes and who would be willing to use them, and what would that look like for the world? I get kind of paranoid sometimes thinking about how close we live to Washington, D.C. And, I'd imagine that if a country's going to drop a nuke on the country, that would be one of the first places that they drop one, is right on the White House. So that's a little frightening because we would be in the kill zone for that. And so I don't like the back and forth with countries saying, oh, we're going to launch a nuke, you're going to launch a nuke, because that ends up being bad for everybody involved. Nobody wins in a nuclear war, and nobody wants to see it come to that. Honestly, my personal opinion is all nukes should be dismantled and not be made again. I understand where some people come from saying, like, it's intimidating to know that you have them. But it's what happens when the intimidation tactics don't work? Are we going to destroy our planet because we're going to fight over territory? I mean, I don't want to see that happen. I don't think anybody would want to see that happen. So we shouldn't have nukes in the first place, but that's a whole nother story for a different day. So this is what I think most likely would happen, is collapsing the US economy by sanctioning us and selling off 2.3 trillion in US treasuries simultaneously. Yeah. Are you going for a drive? Okay. I'll see you when you get back. Be careful. I love you. What? Oh my goodness. He's terrible for interrupting my stream. What? I'm not on camera. So, no, Canada didn't burn the White House. British troops did in 1814 during the War of 1812 as retired. It was essentially Canadians. We weren't officially Canada yet, but okay, where was I here? No Botox, Ozempic, or insulin. I mean, Botox, whatever. I know that there's people out there that use Botox for non-cosmetic reasons. I know it's a treatment for I think it's called hypohidrosis. It's a condition where you overly sweat. You sweat way too much, and it can cause some really terrible sores. It's a horribly uncomfortable, painful condition, and they use Botox to treat it. I also know that they use Botox for things like facial stitches. So they'll put Botox in Like, say, for example, um, you have cuts or lacerations that are really bad on your face. Sometimes they use Botox to freeze your face, so that way you don't move your face in a way that will tear open your stitches. It kind of freezes that area and gives the skin an easier time to heal with less tension. Um, so I don't know how often that's used. So I mean, but still, I mean, there's other medications like insulin that are really important, that I don't know if we can manufacture here. No clear winning, but fostering Canadian identity. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that you were posting more of your comment there. Um, so yeah, I think the most likely consequence would be more economic, than violent. I mean, that's my hope. I don't wanna see anybody go to war because, I mean, it's the civilians that pay for that the most with their lives. Really? I don't wanna see anybody die, but I can't say that that's not what it will come to, right? Donald Trump is unpredictable, so who knows? He might push their hand and use force first. Who knows? Nobody knows what's gonna happen in this situation. It's like waking up every morning not knowing what's gonna happen. Oh my goodness. Um, so I was just looking at some of this information. So I wanted to look and see how much information on that particular post was actually um, true, what could happen. Um, ah, my foot is asleep. So an invasion of Greenland in the US would mean that the US attacking a fellow NATO ally would fundamentally violate NATO's core principles. NATO does not have a clear formal mechanism to kick out a member, which I mentioned earlier. It only explicitly allows members to leave voluntarily, so expulsion would require extraordinary political and legal improvisation or a de facto suspension. Um, and I mean, that says to me that they've never come across this before where an ally has been a threat. This is the kind of feels like it's the first time we're dealing with this. So, I mean, there is no clause to kick someone out of NATO, but it may be something that, you know, is a result of this kind of conflict. So if the US invaded Greenland anyway, despite some of these named consequences, obviously there'd be massive global shock, and that would be that would happen in the way of like markets plunging, alliances would freeze, and the UN obviously would be involved, to kind of deal with this conflict. Article 5, which is collective defense, would become politically unusable. NATO would be paralyzed because the attacker is the alliance's strongest member. Denmark would invoke in the international law, possibly NATO consultations, Article 4, and seek UN condemnation. I don't know what UN condemnation would look like or what kind of consequences would come with that. But again, this is kind of unprecedented. So who really knows which way this is going to turn out? If NATO effectively expelled or suspended the U.S., even without formal expulsion clause, NATO could suspend U.S. participation, relocate NATO command structures out of U.S. control, and form a NATO minus U.S. alliance in practice, which I have been seeing a lot of kind of posts and articles about a possible alliance without the US involved. I don't know how much truth there is to that because I haven't really looked into it, but it is scary to think about the world coming together and unifying against the US, and what exactly that would mean for us here in actual, North America. NATO would lose its military backbone overnight because US does provide 70% of NATO's military capability. So Europe would have to expand their defense budgets, rely more heavily on France and the UK's nuclear deterrence, which again, we get back into nuclear war territory and how scary that is. NATO would survive, but it would be it would be weaker and it would be more regional. Some of the effects on the United States could be that the US would become severely isolated, closer to the status of a global pariah, though still extremely powerful. Whether or not that would mean powerful enough to overtake anyone that would come against us from NATO, who knows? Because, I mean, you think 31 nations coming together, would that be enough to even just challenge the US trying to take Greenland? I don't know. There'd be sanctions from Europe, Canada, and possibly Japan. Loss of trust from nearly all allies worldwide, but that would be expected. That we're already losing massive trust from all of our allies with just the threats. So, I mean, I think economically the US is going to feel that. And I think they already are. The US would still be the strongest military on Earth, but it would lose basing access across Europe, lose intelligence sharing networks, and face increased global resistance and containment. So, even though the US would remain the strongest military, it's still going to be severely limited without access to airspace, sea space, like, for example, what we talked about earlier with Canada. I'd imagine it would be very similar in Europe about, losing access to airspace and things like that. So that would again contribute to putting the US in a very vulnerable position. Because right now we have access to that intelligence. That being cut off, where does that leaves the US blind almost, right? There'd be severe market instability because we are, even though a lot of people haven't left the US, they don't realize that there is a rest of the world and we are very much a global economy at this point. So the US becoming isolationist would again leave us, up shit's creek, honestly, and without access to many things that we can't either manufacture, grow, or have already here. Potential coordinated sanctions, which we already talked about, reduce dollar dominance over time if allies accelerate alternatives. Yeah, so we will lose the edge, right? We're a very powerful country worldwide. But that comes with responsibility. And if we abuse that power, that can be taken away from us, right? We're still going to be strong, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be able to defend ourselves from someone else trying to come in and take over, right? And it makes us very vulnerable to countries like Russia and China, which is who he's worried about now in Greenland. Russia and China would also benefit enormously, exploiting the fractured Western alliance. Europe might push faster towards a strategic autonomy, a unified European military force, and a rules-based international order would be deeply damaged. This says that would war break out between NATO and the US? And this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with the article, that it would be very unlikely that it will come to violence. And I'm crossing my fingers that that is true. And that I'm hoping that if we get that far enough, that the consequences will be economic, because, right, the economy can recover. It's much harder to recover from actual violence and bombs. And, we've been very lucky here in the US that, considering we have Canada above, Mexico below, they haven't really been a threat to us. It's much more difficult for other countries to have access to our actual land mass to attack us. But if we lose that alliance and we lose that with Canada, who's to say, we've got to not only protect ourselves from Europe, but we're going to have to protect ourselves from Canada, from Mexico, from where other countries, because what if NATO decides to get together and all the allied countries shack up in Canada and decide to attack us at the northern border, right? How do we even know? Okay. So NATO countries would not likely militarily fight the US. The response would be political, economic, and legal, not kinetic. The priority would be containment and deterrence, not confrontation, which is, that makes sense. They are a defensive alliance. They don't want conflict. They don't want violence. So let's diplomatically deal with this issue and try to find ways that we can deter these people from trying to take this land and starting a war in any way possible and avoid violence. That makes sense, right? That's what civil people do, is they try to talk it out and find non-violent ways to deal with conflict. And I'm hoping that that would be successful. If the US invaded Greenland and was effectively expelled from NATO, um, the US would remain powerful but lose its leadership role. The global order would tilt towards instability. Rivals of the West would gain ground. So, I mean, that would be just kind of handing the US possibly to Russia and China or other areas as well. Trust in alliances worldwide would collapse for a generation. It would, I mean, we're already losing the trust of our allies. It's going to take a lot to build that back. It's going to take a lot to earn it back. Um, so, I mean, that seems like that would be the way. Trust in alliances worldwide would collapse for an entire generation. We'd have to do a lot of work to earn the trust back. It would likely be remembered as one of the most self-destructive acts in modern geopolitical history. Right. Absolutely. So I then looked up to see if the reason why troops and forces were being deployed to Greenland and what kind of effect that would be. So they are sending forces to Greenland. I know Canada supposedly was, and so was Germany. And this is hopefully mainly for deterrence, to kind of say, hey, we're going to defend this territory. The presence of troops raises the political and military cost of any hostile action, making conflicts less likely. So, I mean, the US is spending money out the wazoo already. I don't, I would, for one, like to know where all this money is coming from and what that's going to look like on our economy here at home, because I would imagine that would raise our national debt massively, and not put us in a very good economical position. So troops being sent to Greenland also means that you're reassuring Denmark and Greenland, their populations, that the allies are standing together with them, and trying to prevent panic or unilateral actions. So it's more of a, hey, Greenland, we got your back. And for stabilization as well, to secure key infrastructure, airports, ports, communications, and to prevent misunderstandings, accidents, or escalation. And I think the key one there is escalation. So, you know, if we, it's more of a like a defense display, right? We're gonna puff up and we're gonna show you how strong we are so that you're less likely to attack us. Whether or not that's going to be successful, that remains to be seen. It doesn't look like it so far, but that is the hope. So and then I was questioning, well, what would mean troops, what troop movements would suggest, or kind of lean towards violence? Because right now it's looking like, again, this is a defense mechanism. But there's other actions that they could take that would mean that they're ready for violence. So having active combat orders or rules of engagement publicly changed, large scale evacuation of civilians. And I was watching an interview with a Greenlander who was a young mother who was really, really scared, thinking like, where do we go? What do we do? Like, how do I protect myself? And apparently there's some type of training that they're giving to people in Greenland. And there are still Oh, no, I don't want to turn my sleep mode on. Stop it, phone. There we go. That there's people in Greenland that are actually talking about or already have gone to Denmark because they feel safer there. I mean, if you're living in an area where you think that you might be attacked and you have kids or a family to protect, yeah, I would be on board with that. Air and naval forces taking offensive postures, missile strike aircraft or amphibious assault forces moving into position, political leaders openly threatening force. And who's the one doing that right now? Trump. Troop deployments by themselves don't meet that threshold, which is a good thing because this just means that we're not at the point where violence is imminent. It's possible, but it's not imminent. So why would the Allies try very hard to avoid fighting? Well, Greenland has a very small civilian population. Any conflict there would be strategically symbolic but globally explosive. Allies would prioritize containment, diplomacy, and signaling. No NATO country wants to be responsible for escalation involving a nuclear armed power, which, I mean, that makes sense. You want to protect yourself, but the US is a big, scary guy with nukes. You don't want to escalate it to the point where they're shooting them at you. So I totally get that, where we want to focus on diplomacy rather than violence. And we don't want to get to the point of violence. So the strategy would almost certainly be show strength, avoid shots. So again, a defense display. So what would violence look like if it happened? So if things did deteriorate, which hopefully right now is still unlikely, it would probably be isolated incidents, accidents or miscalculations, standoffs, but not large battles. So hopefully not full scale warfare. That is the hope. Again, anything is possible, but the hope is no violence. So ultimately, in alliance politics, troops are more often sent to keep violence from happening. So it's very similar to like locking the door, turning on the lights, making sure everyone was watching, everyone's aware of their surroundings and keeping an eye on what's happening. It's the allies are watching the US much more closely than they may have been before, and they are setting themselves up to prepare for the worst. We're hoping for the best, but we're going to be prepared for the worst. So, yeah. So then after I was looking at all that, I was like, why was NATO formed to begin with? I didn't really honestly know that because I don't really know a whole lot of war history in particular. I probably should. That's my own negligence, honestly. But NATO was created in 1949 to address a very specific fear at the start of the Cold War, that Western Europe could be militarily or politically overwhelmed by the Soviet Union. So Europe was devastated economically and militarily after World War II. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe, and communist governments were spreading influence westward. Western European countries were too weak to defend themselves alone. So there was a real fear that another world war could start, or that countries might fall to pressure without a single shot being fired. So being taken over in other ways than using violence. So NATO was built around one revolutionary idea: is an attack on one member is an attack on all. So it's really emphasizing unity in this. This is known as Article 5. So the logic was simple. If the Soviet Union attacked any NATO country, it would automatically face the combined military power of all members, and at the time that included the United States. The threat was meant to prevent war, but not start it. So the United States joined. I thought they were a founding member. I'm not sure. Hang on a second. Maybe I got that back wrong here. Oh, yeah, it is. Yes, the United States is a founding member of NATO, having signed the North Atlantic Treaty in 1949, establishing the alliance of with 11 other North American and European nations for collective security against the Soviet Union. The U.S. was central to NATO's creation and remains a key participant in this lasting military alliance. NATO was established on April 4th, 1949, with the signing of the treaty in Washington, D.C. Okay, so it's a founding member. That part was correct. Okay, where did my... Here we go. Okay, so before NATO, the U.S. usually avoided permanent alliances. But after World War II, the U.S. leaders believed isolation had helped cause World War II. And this just is an interesting off-topic fun fact in regards to this. My husband and I have had this conversation several times about when World War II started. Because growing up in Canada being part of the Commonwealth, when Britain went to war in World War II, Canada went right alongside them. So we were always taught in school that World War II started in 1939. And my husband was surprised by that because he said that he was always taught that I believe the U.S. Joined World War II in 42, I think. 1941, almost 1942. It was like December 7th, 1941. So December 8th is when they declared war on Japan, officially bringing the U.S. into the World War II conflict. So he was taught in school that World War II started in 1941 because that's when the U.S. actually joined. But the conflict actually started, actually started in 1939. So there was a vast difference of when we were taught when World War II started because it was so different for both countries. I just thought that was interesting. So anyway, the U.S. leaders believed that isolation had helped cause World War II. A permanent alliance would stabilize Europe, and a stable Europe meant less chance of another global war. So NATO marked a huge shift in U.S. foreign policy, being more involved in the rest of the world. But NATO was not created to conquer territory, start wars, or expand empires. Its original mission was defensive, so deterrence, stability, and containment. So NATO and the Warsaw Pact faced each other across Europe. There was no direct war that ever occurred between them. Many historians argue that NATO succeeded precisely because it prevented war. So it did what it was intended to do, was to hopefully prevent war. Now, in most recent times, we can see that that's not really happening. There is war going on in Europe, but they are I'm not sure. Did the Ukraine officially join NATO yet, or? I know that there was a lot of talk about it for a while. No, it has not become a member of NATO, but it is a NATO partner country with a long-standing aspiration for membership, which NATO agreed to support in 2008, though a formal path remains complex due to ongoing conflict and Russian opposition. Ukraine has sought NATO membership for years, particularly after Russian aggression in 2014 and 2022. While the process was expected to involve a membership action plan, NATO shifted to a faster one-step process in 2023, but full membership requires meeting conditions and achieving peace. Okay. Many countries wanted NATO's security guarantee. And obviously, since the Cold War, those security threats have not vanished. New risks emerged, like regional conflicts, cyber threats, terrorism. So that's why NATO still exists today, but it's kind of evolved. But the ultimate goal is still the same, as to deter conflict. Oh, okay. So NATO was created to, again, prevent another war, defend democratic nations collectively, deter aggression through unity, keep Europe stable with US involvement in its existence is one of the main reasons why the Cold War never turned into World War III. And that kind of makes sense. And I mean, that kind of leads me to believe that, so with Greenland and Denmark being NATO members and Russia not attacking because of NATO and because of the US, um, as it stands right now, why would Russia or China move in on a NATO ally with the US, you know? So, like, it's kind of already collectively agreed that we're going to protect each other. So it would be, with Russia struggling in Ukraine right now still, why would they go and try and take over Greenland, or why would China try and take over Greenland with NATO intact and so strong with the US? It's like those two countries wouldn't really be much of a threat right now, and be kind of stupid for China or Russia to make a move on Greenland with NATO in place and the US as still a member of it. So it feels very, um, I guess the threat that Trump is trying to inflate of Russia and China just kind of feels like false. I don't feel like security is the real reason behind it. Greenland does, and the Arctic in general has a lot of resources that, of course, all countries kind of want to get their hands on. And I feel like that's more of a motivator rather than security, than anything else. But with this administration and the way that it lies, and the way it tries to cover up its true intentions, I feel like that's just that's just I can't think of the right word right now because my brain is so tired. Um but it's just a facade, really, of just saying, well, we're worried about our security, when ultimately behind the scenes security is not the problem. It's securing the resources that are available in Greenland is more of the priority. And that wouldn't surprise me at all. It really wouldn't. But anyway, where are we at? We're at almost an hour already. Oh my goodness. Well, if you watch that entire thing, I really only wanted this to be like 30 minutes. But again, sometimes when I get yammering, I go on and on and on. But if you watch that, I appreciate you. If you want to um, share your thoughts and opinions on it, feel free to leave me a comment. Please like the stream. Remember that everything that I shared and talked about today is basically my opinion and how I feel about it. It's meant for not entertainment purposes, but discussion purposes. And I don't claim anything in this video as true fact or is something going to happen. I don't know. It's just possibilities. It's talking about what the consequences will be if the US gets a little too big for its britches and decides to attack an ally. And I mean, it's going to be a scary world if that happens. And I don't want it to happen. But who am I to say? I'm just one little person. And all I can really do from my end is protest, pray, and hope for the best, which is what, majority of us can do, right? But thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you. Please like, subscribe if you want to see more. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And remember, make good choices.